Being here and taking the time this morning. What we're going to do is we're going to have a chat for about probably 40 minutes or so with the panel, then open it up to questions. So if you have questions, please kind of keep hold of them in your mind, and you can direct the conversation as we go forward. Am I competing with somebody else's PA now? That's just rude, isn't it? There we go. So my name is ffinlo Costain. I am the editor of the UK's only land use news channel, which is called 8.9. That's the number 8, the word point, the number 9.com. I also produce the Farmgate podcast. Now, by the time we've finished, I expect you'll all have subscribed to the podcast and signed up for our newsletter at 8.9, which comes out weekly and is free. And previously, before that, I was the chief executive of Farmwell. Did a lot of advising the government on agricultural greenhouse gases, and you can judge for yourselves how successful that was. Thank you very much to Candida Dunford-Wood for inviting me into Bridport Food Matters. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been asked to make a few announcements, sort of put out a few notices. The first is that Bridport is a sustainable food place, and in this tent you can sign up to be part of the journey, to get involved. There's a growing community of foodie people in Bridport. Even I know from the hour away that I live that it's a thriving community in terms of food. The food stuff is really busy here. Lots of workshops, growing, cooking and eating during the course of the year, so please do sign up and get involved. You can sign up just over there after we've finished talking. Next door is the Friendly Food Club, where especially children or anybody who just feels like their inner child needs to come out and play. You can make your own smoothies, you can get your hands dirty in soil. I think there's water there, all kinds of stuff going on, and artwork and clay, which is basically soil that sticks together really well, that you can go and play with. And across the way we have the Cookery Theatre. Why is soil key to adapting to climate change? Well, soil, as I'm sure many of you here already kind of get the gist, is absolutely everything from the dirt beneath our feet to the living system that feeds us 3 times a day and more. But it's also key to channeling the Earth's water cycles, to channeling the miracle of photosynthesis, and it is the foundational basis of biodiversity. Lots of people get excited about large species, rewilding lynx or big birds of prey. The biodiversity that really matters to me are the microbes in the soil, because that is where everything grows from. It's also a living ecosystem that breathes carbon dioxide, and so in balance with us, it's really important stuff. And without it, frankly, humanity wouldn't exist. I'm joined by Tim Williams on my right. Tim is a regenerative farming expert, and when I say that, he's a Kiwi, and his entire sort of your reputation is global. Tim really is one of the gods of regenerative farming, and somebody that everybody should listen to. I've interviewed Tim before on my podcast. Everywhere I go, Tim pops up, and his face is there. He's great at this stuff, and he works at Earth Farmers. That's his website. By Alex Montgomery, and you'll be able to go and stick your head in his compost out there afterwards, and that barrel. He's from Generation Soil UK, which he's going to talk about a bit, from Bristol. And I'm joined by Leila Scriven, an organic and regenerative farmer from Tamarisk Farm, who's going to talk a bit about her personal journey. But I'm going to get Tim to do some of the heavy lifting to start us off, and we're going to start with mitigation. In other words, how do we try and stop climate change from happening? And Tim, can you talk to us about how healthy and indeed unhealthy soils work to our benefit and to our detriment in terms of climate change and carbon emissions? So basically the question is, how does soil breathe?
Good question. I'll try this one. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So basically, if you imagine, let's start with the grassland situation, because that's my happy place. You imagine the grass as a field of solar panels, and what it's doing is it's capturing that energy from the sun, and it's feeding that energy into the soil through that carbon capture basically, and then it's feeding that into the soil through sugars or extracts, and that's feeding into a biological system. So then it's basically exchanging energy for minerals. And within that system, so in a highly functional soil system, you have bacteria, protozoa, fungi, all living, communicating with the plants, consuming that carbon in various forms, and then converting that carbon into food for us, but also storing it in the soil. And it's that storage capacity of that biology that's going to really drive that carbon sequestration down. And the healthier that system, obviously, the better it performs, the more energy it's going to capture. If you've got degraded soil, so if they're tilled, if they've got a lot of chemistry there, if they've applied a lot of soluble fertilizers, then basically that biology dies out, it disappears. And also the structure, it breaks down, so you don't have that nice absorbing, so like heavy rain events, things like that, doesn't absorb that moisture, it kind of shuts down. And so you've got one system which is drawing carbon down and is a carbon sink, and then another system is actually emitting that carbon and doing the exact opposite.
So essentially, we're talking about with healthy soil, in terms of that breathing element, it's going to be absorbing carbon dioxide out of the air. It's also going to be emitting carbon dioxide in a loop. Yeah. But the healthier that soil is, the more that carbon is drawn down, and it's also going to be sequestering carbon en route. But if you've got unhealthy soil, that process just doesn't work so well.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got like two modes of action there. You've kind of got in that topsoil. If you've got topsoil, it hasn't been ploughed out. But where the sort of, if you do market gardening or anything like that, where you mulch, put down compost, you'll see there's a layer of topsoil. That's kind of like that, the biology working away, doing its thing. That will emit carbon dioxide, but further down, what it is actually the plants pumping that sugar into the soil. And if you've got like mycorrhizal communities underneath that soil, they'll actually be banking that further down into the system. So you're kind of running these two systems. Whereas if you tilling your soils excessively, if you're applying chemistry to your soils, then your fungal communities will actually die out, and so you're basically burning up that carbon. Even if you are returning a lot of crop residues or a lot of mulches back into that system, you're actually burning it up. And so the challenge is within a healthy soil system is actually maintaining that healthy biological community, and then sort of organic regenerative systems. That's kind of the sole driver, is looking after your soil biology, and then that maxes out the plant's ability to photosynthesize, and actually plants will gather sort of secondary metabolites from a healthy system. They'll actually gather secondary metabolites, will feed back into that system, so you have a better plant that's actually photosynthesizing more efficiently. So it's kind of like this compounding system where the system's getting healthier, it's actually exponentially bringing more carbon into the system. And the reverse is true as well. So it gets exponentially worse when that system breaks down. And so you see it in the sort of conventional agricultural systems is where that soil is breaking down.
Fantastic. Can everybody hear, by the way? No, so Tim, can you get the microphone a little bit closer? And just other panelists, if you sort of stick it, like karaoke, if you just stick it to your chin.
I hate karaoke.
It's there. We're doing karaoke afterwards. And welcome to those people who are standing outside the tent. Feel free to come in. There are chairs here if you want to get out of the sun. But if you can hear us anyway out there, welcome to stay there. That's fantastic. Now, Tim, I want you to get down to some of the nitty-gritty in terms of how soil helps human beings and why it's important in terms of adaptation. But I kind of want to put that in context because it's increasingly difficult to deny, despite the fact that at the moment there are so many different ways of measuring average global temperatures. Nobody can quite agree officially between 1.2 and 1.4. The reality is that we are already at 1.5. I think it's hard to deny that now, 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. There is almost no chance of not being at 2 degrees, probably by about 2040 or shortly thereafter. 2 degrees is civilizational change. We know that. This is locked in, not just because of the science, but because of the societal processes that stop us being able to prevent that. So democracy, for example, preventing rapid change, and designed for evolutionary change, pushback against net zero, a whole range of different things. Society and the food system, of course, society is locked in, unfortunately, to getting to this point where we genuinely need to work out what on earth we're going to do. And soil, of course, is absolutely key to that. So, Tim, could you give us a bit of context 2 degrees may well wipe out not just harvests, but consecutive harvests, not only here, but elsewhere in the world as well, significantly increasing competition, leading to extreme food insecurity, incredible levels of migration from the south, and conflict. So healthy soil is key to adapting to climate change. Why?
I mean, that's quite a big question. So basically, if you have a healthy soil system, it's all about resilience and coping with that, the extremes, I guess. Sorry. Is that better? Good? Cool. So it's all about coping with extremes. So if you have a healthy soil system, it's not necessarily about maxing out productivity, which is all about yields and getting the most calories out of the system. It's actually about developing a system that's going to sustain through periods of drought, through periods of flood, having a system where the plants are actually healthy, so they've got their own immunity. So if there's plants getting attacked by pests and disease, in that process, that photosynthetic process, actually a healthy plant working with a healthy soil system, if you can get, for example, a plant brixing above 12%, it's pretty much immune to most pests and disease. So having a healthy soil system, increasing that sort of the humidification of soil. So if you have really nice, dark, spongy soils, they're going to maintain a lot more moisture. So the spring that we've just had is a very sort of irregular spring. It's been very, very dry. If you've got really nice, healthy soils that are fully humidified soils that are capturing moisture in that system, they're far more resilient. And also, I think here in the UK, we've got to be really careful that we don't rely on other countries to be producing food for us, like places like Spain, where they're under a heck of a lot of pressure, and that's just applying far more pressure to the system. So I think thinking about closer to home, what we can do with that sort of thing is going to be really, really important.
Absolutely, and not just at home, but around the world. Obviously, if we have healthy soils and we're able to feed ourselves, then we're in a good position. But the reality is that we need healthy soils literally everywhere in the world. And with regenerative agriculture, you can very rapidly turn back even really quite desert-based systems, using livestock in particular to get that soil fertility back. You can change land back from relative desert back to fertile ground in the space of about 5 or 10 years. But we need that everywhere, because if we don't have that everywhere, then conflict breaks out. We're 9 meals away from anarchy, they say. If you miss 3 meals, it's bad enough. If your family misses 9 meals, then people start turning on each other. And if that happens elsewhere in the world, that leads to conflict and migration coming northwards. And one of the studies I've recently seen has talked about 3 to 6 billion people being without a livable home by 2100. And that's, those people are going to go somewhere, and that's going to be a real challenge. And the other thing that I think is really important is water. That in terms of physical impacts on individuals, we know that if we have healthy soil, it holds water as far down as the roots go. If we're holding water, then it means that we can continue producing food even in drought. If we're holding water, it's not running off and flooding the estate further downstream. So it's simple things like that, as well as those sort of bigger theme issues that Tim was talking about there. Now, I said that this wasn't just about here, it's about everywhere. But what we care about, I suppose, is what happens in our own backyard. But we have to recognise that backyard, that here, whether it's Bridport or Bristol, Auckland or Austin, Texas or Mumbai, local people in those local places, it really makes a difference. And so, Alex, I wonder if I can come to you and just ask you how ordinary people can make a difference to soil health.
I think it starts with our relationship to soil. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've all been migrating as a society, as communities, out of the rural environments and into urban environments and into cities and towns, and we've forgotten how important soil is to us. And I think the way we view it is important, and we just need to rethink our relationship to it. And we need to view it more like a friend or a family member and start caring for it and having that reciprocal relationship to it. And rather than extracting our food and the nutrients within them that have come from the soil, consuming them, and then chucking the rest in the bin into landfill. We need to start giving back to the soil rather than just taking from it. So it is reimagining the food system as a cycle, as nature's developed all these cycles over billions of years. We need to realise that going from the cycles and going to a linear system has upset things. So I think what we really need to do is change that relationship and get involved. I think the number one thing to do is get involved, and that looks like home composting, joining community composting schemes, going and volunteering at your community gardens, supporting regenerative farmers. If you are growing your own food, great. If you're not, have a go. And just think about how you can look after the soil rather than just extracting from it. Adopt no-dig principles. Just really think about looking after it and viewing it as a living organism rather than just brown stuff beneath your feet, really.
Thanks, Alex. And of course, just to reiterate that Bridport is the centre of a food community, and if you're remotely interested in this stuff, do get involved in Bridport because it is the most vibrant food community, I think, in the region. But Alex, just talk to us about what you've got over there and what Generation Soil UK is and why you want people's money.
So I founded Generation Soil, and 3 years ago, in 2016, didn't do any of the soil modules at uni because I thought it was a waste of time and boring. And since then, I've learned a lot about it, and here I am discussing soils on a panel. Generation Soil really is just about improving people's relationship with soil through food system services and education to regenerate our soil health. We run education workshops looking at the food system level, so rather than focusing on cooking and nutrition, we go into schools and we teach kids about reimagining food waste as a valuable resource, composting it, having that reciprocal relationship. It is all built on that circular food system model. The kids all get it, they're like, oh, it's like the life cycle, and I'm like, yes, and then a lot of the adults are like, oh, that's interesting, I haven't seen that before. The education is the most important thing. We also collect business and household food waste across the city, turn it into compost and return it to our members. And we are currently crowdfunding for a 2-acre food forest market garden where we can combine the growing, the composting, the eating of the food, the education, all in one place to really help us transition to circular food systems.
Thank you. There are lots of things that go round and round here, and I'm just going to mention one next door, which is the one where you can go and make your own smoothie and then get on a bike to blend it, which is amazing. It's so exciting. I get really excited by that. So go and have a look at that. But there's another thing that goes round and round out there, and that's Alex's compost machine or barrel that he can turn his compost in. There's something magical in there, and it's worms. And I say that it's magical because nobody knows how they got there. It's really exciting, and I think the scientific term for it is magic. The only way that we can explain that these things have appeared out of the food waste from Alex's fridge and everything, just how did they get there? They're amazing. So go and have a look, and if you're lucky, Alex might even show you a worm egg on his phone afterwards as well. Leila, you have a farm. You farm locally. Tell us about it. Tell us about the size, what you produce, your rotation, and then why soil is so important to you personally.
We're Tamarisk Farm down in West Bexington. My grandparents started the farm in 1960. We have about 600 acres, 2/3 of which is registered with the National Trust. I always say we're big for a small farm, but small for a big farm, because people hear 600 and that sounds like a lot. In the scale of farms, it isn't very big, which I think is probably a benefit because it enables us to think more carefully about all of the aspects that we're looking at. My grandparents started working to organic principles at the very beginning, and when certification became a thing in, I think it was 1972, they signed up straight away, so we've been organic since the very beginning of organic certification. We are a proper mixed farm, so we've got beef, cattle, we've got sheep, both for their meat and for their wool, and arable, so we grow wheat and rye and barley, and we have a small veg garden as well, all of which the vegetables all get sold locally, and most of the rest of it gets sold locally as well, but some does go a bit further afield. Our animals move around their fields on a regular basis. It's called rotational grazing. Generally they'll be in one field for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the time of year and the size of the field. And sometimes we will split those fields up into smaller areas for more controlled graze of the field. We don't do what is, you've probably heard of mob grazing. We don't do that. That requires more animals per a greater stocking density than we can do. So what we just call it is controlled grazing, because we're trying to mimic some of the effects of mob grazing without having to set up a fence 3 times a day to move them as quickly as you'd have to for that one. Yeah, and then
What soil of water?
well, it's to use soil-related terms, it's the bedrock of everything that we do. If you haven't got a thriving, healthy soil with its own micro ecosystem, you can't get anything growing. I mean, if you were to take some of your wonderful, lovely compost with the worms, you know, put it in an oven for 5 hours and try and grow something in it, it wouldn't do anything. It would be dead. It would be dirt rather than soil. So it's this idea that soil is its own living, breathing organism in its own right. And if you don't look after that, we won't get the grasses we have. If you don't look after it, we won't have the conservation, you know, the wonderful wildflowers we have. And if you don't look after all of that, you can't do anything with it. It's just nothing. And so you really do need to focus at that very, very base level to get anything else coming from there.
And of course, soil produces 80% of the food that we eat, if not more. You know, whether it's the cereals and grains. 98.8. Okay, fair enough. I think it depends on how much lab-produced protein there is that's sort of been put into the system at that stage. And fish, indeed. There you go. Yeah. So if we include seafood, then it comes down to about 8%, I think. So yeah. So we're all the cereals, the grains, the pulses, everything else. At the same time, of course, you have livestock that are eating the grass from the rough grazing land, ideally, that can't be used to produce human food. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard the idea, the myth, I'm going to say, that cattle are in some way bad for the climate. This is not true. The problem is the system that the cattle are kept in. Cattle and sheep as well, ruminants in various different systems, are absolutely critical for building soil fertility, particularly on land that isn't naturally as fertile as other land, in order to ensure that we're able to get food and fibre from those systems. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to promote my TEDx talk. So if you are interested in going and having 15 minutes sort of much more crisply explained than I'm going to be able to do now, it's called "We Can't Solve the Climate Crisis Without Cows." And I recommend that you have a look at that, because it explains exactly why cattle are critical. But Leila, how on your farm have you taken action specifically to boost nutrient cycling in the soil and the soil organic matter on your farm?
So, as I said, we are organic, which means that there is no use of herbicides or pesticides directly onto the soil. And whilst people will think that that's a good way of getting a better yield, at the moment you put these things, which are poisons, onto the ground, they will always inevitably affect that microorganism ecosystem that I was just saying that you need. So you want to avoid doing that as much as you can. There's a lot of talk about how pesticides are bad for, you know, food is bad for you, but it really is bad for the soil as well, because we're all living creatures. And again, we've got animals. We every now and again one of them gets ill. Previously, there is now, thank goodness, a reducing across conventional farms as well. But previously, people would use wormers, so helminths, to look after their animals preemptively. As soon as you put those into your animals, they're going to be putting it out the other side, and they're going to be affecting not just the dung beetle, but especially the dung beetle population and other insects, which are very, very sensitive to these things. So whilst we do use what we need to look after the animal, we will never do a blanket preemptive herd anything, so that if I've had to treat this individual animal, at least all of the dung coming out of these animals are still safe for the microorganisms to live on, and that is really, really important. We use the animals within the arable rotation as well. We don't put on artificial fertilisers that can set the entire balance of the ground sort of out of whack if you start adding things on in proportions that the plants and the microorganisms don't know how to deal with. So by utilising our sheep primarily, but also the cattle, into the arable land, they can eat the grass, process it through their body into a more bioavailable form for the organisms in the soil, and that can help bring that soil health up and increase the humus production quicker than if you were to get your tractor out there with, you know, a big mower on the back and use diesel to cut that down and then let all of the organisms try and take the grass into soil. It's much, much more efficient.
Thank you very much. And so, of course, then we're talking about the nutrition, the role of nutrient cycling in the soil, which then, of course, moves itself into biodiversity more broadly, but specifically into our food, into it becomes the food of the animals that then become the food of humans and the cereals and everything else. So it's really important in terms of the nutrition, which of course gives me a little segue to advertise the next session, which is at 12:30, when we're going to be talking about ultra-processed food and the real critical importance of making sure that your body is farmed in the way that soil should be farmed. In other words, that you get nutrient cycling in your bodies, that you're eating healthy food, as much whole food as you possibly can, in order to make sure that you are healthy in body and mind. So that's at 12:30. Tim, can you explain what resilience is in terms of economic, social and ecological? So you get all the easy questions, don't you? And how regenerative land use contributes to resilience.
Okay, I'll try. Bear in mind that I'm just a simple farmer at the end of the day. But yeah, I guess resilience for me is about the ability to withstand shocks and then bounce back. So a resilient system is a flood, for example, might happen, and then what happens to that crop afterwards? Does it fail or does it bounce back? And I think moving forward with the way the climate's going, using the drought that we've just had, I say drought, it's not really a drought. We haven't had rain for 6 weeks, it's a drought. And what happens to the plants within that system? Do they bounce back? Do we have a crop? Sorry, I'll sit up. Do we have a crop at the end of the day? And I think that sort of that resilience in a sort of natural system, there's this element of redundancy. So if we compare conventional systems to regenerative systems, a conventional system is a monoculture of a singular plant that's fed a cocktail of chemicals, because without it, it wouldn't be able to live, essentially. Whereas a regenerative system is we're kind of mirroring nature's rhythms and cycles and understanding how natural systems, ecological systems work, but we're actually encouraging them further. So using sort of scientific knowledge now, anecdotal evidence, indigenous wisdom, and understanding of ecology as well, and applying that to a farming system, so that it's basically mirroring nature, and nature is a resilient system. So instead of moving away from a very fragile, agrochemical heavy system that we're all very reliant on, and very, very, very fragile, particularly moving forward with climate uncertainty, is how can we encourage a healthy soil using diversity, so a lot of diverse plants within our system, cover cropping, using livestock in the system, trying to avoid chemistry where we can, or removing it for certified organic. It creates a resilient system because you're building that health of the system. It's like our own bodies, you know. It's about having immunity, natural immunity in that system, and I guess trying to use farming practices to deliver that.
It's quite a leap, isn't it, I think, for a lot of people to kind of think about soil as a living system in the same way that our bodies are, and that actually you need to take care of your bodies and you need to take care of your soil, and often it's sort of similar things. Soil requires water, it requires nutrients, it requires air, all the same things that we do, and it's almost like this sort of alien life form that we all live on that seems so important in terms of resilience. Leila, how does the way that you work on your farm help to ensure that your system and your business and your community are more resilient than they would be if you weren't working in that way?
So on the basic level, we are a mixed farm, which means that we don't have all of our eggs in one basket. Back in the 90s, when the BSE crisis happened, our beef prices plummeted, but our sheep prices went up. So that's sort of how we managed to weather that little storm. So by being a mixed farm, we've got, you know, more options for things like that to be okay. But also by allowing the soil to thrive, we've got greater ecological biodiversity. I was at a wedding once and started talking to this chap who was an arable farmer, and he said, you must have had terrible aphids this year because you're organic. And we're like, oh, no, we didn't really. He said, oh, it was terrible, it must have been awful for you. He's like, no, because we've got small fields, we've got really rich hedgerows that are thriving, full of life. So for us, whenever there is a pest that might come and affect a crop or the market garden, generally the predator that will deal with that problem for us is not very far behind. And that is a resilience. You know, yes, we might get a peak in the pest population, but we'll also successfully, you know, bypass that. And so that is a really important way of doing it, by having smaller fields, by having, you know, not using pesticides, which to get rid of the pests, but will also affect the predators of those pests. We've got a much more thriving ecosystem all over the place. And also with a greater species diversity, not just of the insects as I was talking about, but also the plants themselves. So we aren't just growing a single type of grass in any one field. A lot of it is permanent pasture, full of lots of different grasses and other herbs and flowers. When you get something like the dry spring we've just had, you can hope that each individual pasture will manage better with those conditions. So if you just have one species and it's a bad season for that species, you're not going to find yourself with a good crop in that field. But by having greater diversity, you should have more resilience to changes in the weather patterns that we have been perceiving over the last few years. It's been, you know, completely unpredictable what your spring is going to be like. It's not a spring anymore in the way that we used to be able to say, oh well, the weather's going to be approximately like this, and we can work with that. It's like, is it going to be like this? Is it going to be like that? Is it going to be something brand new? And so by having that biodiversity, it really just helps everything work together and combat that sort of thing as we get this presumably more extreme and more unpredictable changes to the weather.
Thank you. There's a chap I interviewed, I'm trying to remember his name and I can't remember it at all, but he works in Brazil, he has a big farm there, and he farms and produces 1/3 of the world's organic sugar. Massive. If you fly over it, it just looks like a massive monoculture of sugarcane. But he isn't producing sugarcane, he says, he's producing soil. And he is working really hard to get as much diversity and resilience within his soil as possible. And he says the sugarcane is almost a byproduct of it. And if you only fixate on the sugarcane, you miss everything else that's going on. Now, when he started 30 or 40 years ago, he was doing sugar in exactly the same way that everybody else in the region was doing sugar. So he was growing it in the field with lots of inputs. It was then being cut and I think burned in the field. That was the way that they harvested. And then after it had been burned in the field, it would be taken away and the fields left bare, etc. And at that point in time, if he got a particular termite, a termite would get into the crop and he'd just lose a massive percentage of it. He became regenerative and became this sort of, I can't remember his name, but this sort of hero of regenerative agriculture. I'll try and work it out before the end of the session. And now, through the work that he's done, restoring the virtue in that soil, he's got over 500 arthropods in that soil, so more than any of the nature reserves remotely within reach of him. And now he has 7 termites, but they all control each other, and there is never a blemish on his sugarcane, simply because he's made that soil and that living system work so that he's able to get as much virtue for himself and his own business out of it. So that's how he's created resilience. Alex, people in the city are naturally far removed from the food production and the farmers, you know, often around them, particularly if we think in terms of London or potentially in the city, Bristol. Clearly what you're doing is part of helping people to understand the importance of soil and soil microbes and that sort of thing. How else can we build better connectivity and understanding between those who live their lives in cities and those who produce the food that they eat?
Again, I seem to be repeating myself here, but it is just education, education, education. And I think alongside that, it is providing spaces for that education, opening up green spaces, opening up community farms. So the food forest, the 2-acre food forest, will be opening this year. You know, that's going to be a hub for education for people to come and get involved. It is as simple as that. I think everybody that comes to do a workshop has fun. They get their hands dirty, they get involved, they're doing something. I've had so many friends and strangers being like, when's the market garden opening up? I want to get involved, I want to like come and get my hands dirty. And I've heard so many stories of other farms having open days and volunteer days and people just wanting to get involved. So I think we've really got to cultivate, if you pardon the pun, those spaces, open them up, and it's really hard. I think we can either sit around and wait for central or local government to do that for us, or just take action yourself. So if you can find an unused patch in Bristol, there's another place, and they've turned a car park into a raised bed garden, and now that is being looked after by the locals. If you, I don't know if anybody's heard of guerrilla gardening. You can consult your neighbours, obviously, don't go and do it, but you know, you can turn a little patch of grass into a wildflower meadow, or grow some herbs, whatever it is, growing stuff on your windowsill. I think getting involved, but also finding out how to, like, who's already doing stuff, where you can get involved, and yeah, just support the organisations who are doing it as much as you can. So whether that's donating to charities who are doing the work, signing up to Bridport Sustainable Food Places, donating to the Generation Soil Food Forest Market Garden. Just get involved. Yeah.
We're talking about adaptation, and we're talking about soil and adaptation, but I think there is also a whole adaptation piece which is specific to cities. And I just wonder if you could talk us through a little bit whether there are other ways that city soils and the cities more broadly can improve their own resilience in terms of temperatures, water cycling, a range of different things, and help people adapt to climate change.
Yeah, I mean, soil's the foundation, as Finlo said, of life. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to grow food. We wouldn't have all of the ecosystem services that they provide. And our soils currently are storing 80 years worth of greenhouse gas emissions within the carbon that is the soil organic carbon. The soil organic carbon is now down 40 to 60% according to some studies, and that's only going to decline if we don't look after our soils. So we really need to reimagine our relationship with soil. And again, back to that reciprocal relationship. Repeating myself again, it's giving back to the soil, looking after the soil. For each 1% increase in soil organic matter, you are able to store 20,000 gallons of litre per acre. And that's with 1%. You could be increasing soil organic matter by 10, 15%, maybe even more. And that is providing carbon sequestration, that is reducing flooding risk, that's storing more water within the soil. So you've got drought protection, mitigating the flooding. You're able to boost biodiversity, you're able to grow more edible crops. The crops are going to be more resilient, so you've got a more stable source of food. And if we're doing this locally and within cities, you're opening up green space. You've got trees which have been shown, if you've got lots of trees, that's reducing the heat within the city, it's providing shade. And without soil, we don't have any of that. And I think urban soils in particular, also soils in general, they've just been neglected. And while there's some green grass here, you've got little patches of dead stuff. If you're applying the microbes into the soil, if you're applying more organic matter into the soil, they are going to be much more resilient and flourishing. And as the soils flourish and the plants flourish, humans are also going to flourish. So it is just rebuilding that reciprocal relationship to soil.
Fantastic. Thank you. And although it's not specifically soil related, they grow in soil, and trees, of course, street trees in cities are so important. If you've got enough street trees, you can change the temperature levels at street level, I think by 3 or 4 degrees, something like that. And there's lots of work being done on that in Australia at the moment. So Sheffield, having cut down all their street trees, is going to find that they're in quite a warm place in years to come. I remember the name, or I looked up the name. It's Leontino Balbo Jr., who was the Sugar King. And if you're interested in hearing a conversation with him, if you search for Leontino Balbo Jr. and Farm Gate, then you'll hear my conversation. It was one of the early podcasts I did, and so I'm a bit starstruck, and I do say fascinating, and that's so exciting. I think many times during the course of the podcast. But aside from that, Leontino is brilliant to listen to. Leila, with conflicting policies and funding cuts, government does seem to be greatly undermining ecological progress in Britain, or at least threatening and creating instability in farming organisations, not really understanding the role that farming plays in delivering biodiversity uplift and the way in which it's critical to nature and healthy living and all the nutrition elements, the outcomes that they're chasing. If you had 2 minutes with Keir Starmer, with the Prime Minister, you were stuck in a lift, it's broken down for 2 minutes, you've got him captive, what would you say to motivate him to prioritise regenerative agricultural land use?
Do you want people to eat? Do you want people to live in a world that is green and full of life? Because if we don't focus more carefully on how the green spaces in this country are looked after, how they're farmed, those are the things that we'll be losing, those very fundamental parts of our life. There's so much that could be said. You spoke about flood mitigation in soil quality, food production, but it's not just that, it's how the countryside looks, it's how we live in this world, it's how we think of ourselves as a rural country. And if we don't have farms and farmers able to look after the soil in a way that is beneficial, it's not just beneficial for the farmer, it's not just beneficial for the soil, it's beneficial for the country as a whole and everybody who lives here. And you have to not ignore that. And it's been a very tricky spring trying to work out what the next steps are with all of the policy changes that have been thrown at us.
Absolutely. Farmers and nature-based farming in the UK gets 0.2% of what the government spends to manage more than 70% of these islands. That is a tiny amount of money to get farming to do what's necessary in terms of facing the ecological crisis, in terms of producing food that has the levels of nutrition that are needed to address, the cost crisis within the NHS, for example. The government needs to understand this, and any opportunity that you have, whether that's through letter writing or petition signing or just conversations when you get locked in a lift with Keir Starmer, please remember these things and talk to your MPs and councillors about this. We're going to stop in just a moment in terms of the questions that I have on my paper, which means that we're going to be handing over to you. So if you have a question vaguely forming in your mind, help it along and see if you can get to the point where there's something that you want to ask. Can anybody wave a hand vaguely and tell me if they might have a question, even if it's not good? Okay, in that case, I don't need to keep talking for the next 20 minutes. That's brilliant. Tim, policymakers, this is a final question from me. Just make it good. The answer just needs to be good. Policymakers are still heavily focused on emissions in terms of climate change, emissions reduction, but emissions are only one part of the full carbon cycle. Carbon is just one part of the climate challenge, and the climate challenge is just one part of the ecological crisis. What does government need to learn, and what does it need to unlearn so that land policy delivers food, fibre, biodiversity regeneration and climate mitigation and adaptation together? What does it need to learn and unlearn?
Well, I think the government needs to understand systems thinking basically and kind of stop working in silos. So everything's, you know, you have a health department, you have an agricultural department, everything's departmentalized. And actually we're working within a system. So like the other day I was reading an article and it said by the end of this decade I think health spending is going to be about 50% of all daily spend for the government. And so we're heading into a health crisis, yet we're not supporting farmers on the ground who can deliver the benefits to that. And from that, you know, we're looking, if we start really looking after our soils and really understanding how systems work and understanding that basically the soil system basically mirrors our own system. So we've got human health, we've got human welfare, we've got mental health, we've got green open spaces, we've got infrastructure, importing food, relying on AI. I mean, it's, yeah, technology is definitely not going to get us out of this mess. I think the government needs to backpedal and really get to grips with ecology, understanding how biological systems work, how ecology, yeah, I could go on. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's kind of trying to move away from these departments and actually let's get them talking together. Let's get the education talking with the agriculture, talking with health, talking with even like roading. You know, we're going to rely on imported goods. Where's that going to come from? How are we going to get that into the country? There's enough lorries on the road already. I know people who will ship food, like if you send animals to a big abattoir, they'll get shipped halfway up the country, processed and then shipped back. And it's just crazy. I mean, we're heading for an energy crisis. So yeah, just really think a bit deeper and don't think that AI is going to get us out of this mess, basically.
I mean, soil health is human health. One orange in, I think, the 1950s, to get the same nutrients from that is now you need to eat 16 oranges. One orange in the 1950s, to get the same nutrients, 16 oranges. Why is that? Soil health. You know, we're getting all of these, although we haven't got the direct link, the scientists are heavily pointing towards lifestyle choices and diets as two of the big causes of a lot of the chronic health conditions that people are facing. You've got neurological issues on the rise, mental health issues on the rise, physical health issues on the rise, and this is all because the nutrition in our food is going down. We've been relying on nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium fertilizers, which are not only destroying the microbes, but they're not feeding us the other micronutrients. They're not feeding us the magnesium, the iron, all of these other things which our bodies need, we're not getting. And it's as simple as soil health as to why it's going wrong.
You talked about siloisation and the need to sort of rebuild that connectivity, and that's so important in terms of policy making. The government at the moment, there's been this conversation for the last 20 years about land sharing or land sparing. In other words, land sharing where you integrate these various different processes together, food at the same time as producing nature, at the same time as producing fibre and all these other things. Or land sparing, where you do food here in a small parcel of land, probably a lot of it in factories where you're producing stuff with machines, and you use this bit of land for forestry, this bit of land for nature. And the government, unfortunately, for the land use framework, seems to be heading in that direction. But even then, when it comes to soil, we think in terms of soil, in terms of can we produce food here and carbon there, and can we get some biodiversity here? Oh, we need some water cycling over there. It's putting these things back together, and it's so difficult because government isn't set up that way. So when I was talking to government about climate change emissions, particularly around methane and the role of cycling methane, we would talk to the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is now Energy and Net Zero. They are the government department that instructs the Climate Change Committee. They instruct on emissions. So the Climate Change Committee thinks about emissions and then instructs DEFRA, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, to deliver what they've been thinking about. All of that emissions focus, so DEFRA then really has to focus on the emissions because that's what it's been told to do by these other government departments that have no understanding of farming. And yet farming is this thing that delivers so much more. I'm going to leave you with that thought. There were questions. Who would like to ask a question? We've got one question there, one question there. We're going to start off and I'm going to try and get a microphone to you. And if you are able to, if you have somebody in mind that you'd like to answer the question, please let us know. Thank you very much. It's very crackling.
Thank you, Finley. Question to Tim, I think, is about barriers to change. From what you said, healthy soil leads to a virtuous cycle, even healthy soil. But unhealthy soil is a vicious cycle where the soil is getting unhealthy and more unhealthy. And at the same time, farmers are contributing towards that with fertilisers and pesticides. That must be costly to them. So what's the barriers that farmers are facing?
So I work with a lot of farmers in transitioning to sort of regenerative organic systems. One of the main drivers is mind shift change. So getting out of that headspace, and I think there's a lot of pressure. Context is everything. So there's a lot of pressure. We've been taught how to farm a certain system, and it's a conventional system. You put fertilizer on a crop, it will grow, it needs support through chemistry, but at the end of the day, you'll get a crop. At the moment, it's how do you manage that transition? There's a lot of anxiety, I guess, in that transitional period because it is risky, because you're moving away from a system that's reliant on chemistry to a biological system. So the way forward is to transition step by step and start just peeling back, taking your foot off the accelerator a little bit. So if you use a lot of nitrogen in your system, you could move to like a foliar system where you probably could half or take your nitrogen use down to about a third, which is huge. And I guess that's the benefit of the regenerative system. It's not quite organic, but it's a stepping stone towards that. And so if you can kind of peer back on those inputs and start understanding the system as a whole, then that's that progression. And I guess at the moment there's this sort of generational shift between farming. There's a lot of older farmers that are that are leaving the industry, and a lot of younger farmers coming through. And there's actually quite a strong movement towards understanding and moving towards more of a regenerative system. The other challenge is the policy. They've just undone the whole SFI thing, and it's all up in the air. So there's a lot of uncertainty. It's getting quite challenging at the moment.
Is there funding available for that transition period that farmers go through?
There was. So they have the Sustainable Farming Incentive, so it was kind of a replacement from the BPS. The BPS was the basic payment system, which was just paying farmers for land. Then they moved to a Sustainable Farming Incentive, which was great, and everyone got very excited about it. A lot of people got more excited, and basically if you had a good agent, you got a good deal. What happened is all the small guys got left behind, and they actually shut the funding down overnight. So a lot of farms that, and ourselves included, that we're thinking about progressing into but it's a Sustainable Farming Incentive. So you're basically paid to put practice in that will help move towards that system. So I sort of use it with my clients as a transitional step, as a bit of an insurance. The government basically stopped that overnight because the budget, which is about 1% of the NHS budget or something, basically went. And now they're like, okay, so waiting for the spending review basically to know more.
And that issue of funding the transition, there are different ways of funding the transition, and obviously government funding is incredibly important. And if people are sort of trying to think about why the government should be paying this, why the public should be paying for this, obviously we've talked about lots of reasons there. But importantly, government has been telling farmers how to farm with synthetics and pesticides and everything else in their policy and the way that they fund farming for decades. And so if the government wants to change that, as we all do here, then the government needs to assist with the payments of that. One of the other ways, of course, is to get private investment, private money into farms. And actually in the UK, we are ahead of many other places in the world in terms of these new nature markets and new ways of funding. And I'll give you one example. We talked about reducing nitrogen that's sort of going onto the soil and nitrogen applications. Obviously, if you're going from a system which is high nitrogen to one, and synthetic nitrogen to one that's low nitrogen, there's going to be a change and your yield is going to go down and you're going to take a financial hit. So how do you cushion that? One of the ways is wild farm. So wild farmed is the currently very expensive sliced bread that you can get in Waitrose. But they do you farm wild farm?
I did.
You did. And maybe why you stopped is a different question. But they are paying farmers to farm in a particular way, which is lower in nitrogen. Wild farmed have also now got deals with different water companies. Then the water companies are paying those wild farm farmers to farm in that way because there's then less nutrient leaching that goes into the waterways. And we've recently done an 11-part podcast series within Farmgate looking specifically at those natural capital markets. So if you're interested in that, in how the carbon market works, how biodiversity net gain or voluntary biodiversity credits or renewables work on farms, then have a look for that and just scroll back in the feed because there are programs with experts on there going into the details of those things. So that sort of funding of the transition is super important. We had a couple of questions over here. Did you?
Would like to go first.
Okay.
Yes, we've just
Can you just turn it on?
Thank you. We've just had the spending review, and thankfully Elm's budget has still got budget, but a much bigger amount to NHS. Based on the connection between soil and health, how can we encourage the Treasury to start putting more into agriculture so that we can save our health in the long term? And how can we use our democratic voice as citizens to try and influence that?
I think it's there's a good awareness within people who are interested in soil, but the wider population's not quite understanding it. And I've got to be careful about how I talk about it, because if I start going down into the nitty gritty around microbes, people are like, "Oh, he's a crackpot. He's lost the plot." It's getting more people understanding and aware, and I think like everybody knows about it. We can be writing to MPs, we can be talking about it, we can be bringing it to the forefront and really championing that, and that's what Generation Soil is trying to do. Within my PhD as well, I'm working on how we can improve that human-soil connection. The knowledge has been there for decades, but nothing's been done with it, and it's how do we bring that to the forefront and make it a top priority. And it's getting pretty late. We're cutting it fine, but I think it is just we need to keep on shouting about it, keep on knocking on the doors, keep on having these conversations until they can't ignore us. We can't rely on the government to do the right thing, apparently. So yeah, when there's enough numbers, they've got to do something about it.
Can I just add a little bit there? I would say don't rely on the government. Every day you have a choice. What you put in your mouth is your choice. So support local farmers, support small scale farmers, support people like Tamarisk and us as well. We're soon to do a localised fish box. It's actually understand the importance of healthy food and vote with your pocket, and then hopefully that will encourage a shift from producers, so farmers will be actually, they're driven by the market as well. So if you as consumers start changing that consumer behaviour, I know the organic market, it keeps increasing, then they're going to start waking up and realising, hopefully. And if they don't, who cares? Take responsibility yourselves, and then hopefully it moves from there.
We hope, don't we, that governments think in medium and long term about things. The reality is that they don't, they think in the short term. And so you would hope that by making the case to Treasury, by making those connections about the money that they could save, not least, over the course of time, that would make a real difference. But in the same way that if I'm flagging and I need a bit of energy, I'm going to have a cup of coffee or a crunchy bar in that's my choice, rather than making sure that I've got that healthy diet that's going to make sure that I have the energy, that I've had the smoothie, I've had the cereal in the morning, it's going to let me have that energy sort of gradually over the day. The government is all about crunchy bars. It's all about the short-term energy kick, and getting government to think about anything more than the really immediate short-term of the next election is really difficult. What this government cares about more than anything else, and I say this from experience speaking to the Agriculture Committee in Parliament, this sort of thing, they care about price. The only thing that matters is price, because if price goes up, they will lose the next election. And so they are deeply concerned about the price and the cost of food, and of course an awful lot of things that we're talking about require farmers to be paid a bit more. But I think there are still things that we can do, and actually it's the things that are going on in this field today. It's talking about it to people even that don't want to talk about it, and making sure they hear the conversation. Making sure that people understand that actually it's possible and affordable to get decent nutrition, but you need to know how to cook. You need to know what to do with dry pulses, for example, and that sort of thing. At the same time, be able to plan your meals and be able to source food, and then work out and understand what you can do with food that's a bit past its best, not just simply throwing it out. So there's an awful lot of education in there that we've got away from. And then, of course, with kids, just growing some cress on a piece of kitchen towel, let alone having a couple of yards of land, in your garden for them to grow stuff. I think that's so important personally. So I think it's a long-term thing. I think it's going to be a grassroots thing, but we have to keep on bringing that message to government. You had a question.
Thank you so much, to the panel, for this really important discussion. I wanted to ask your thoughts on geoengineering of the skies, which is currently happening, has been happening for a long time. 50 million this year, and apparently 800 million over the next 4 years, possibly. What is going to be the fallout of these chemicals on the land, the soil, for organic farmers? I mean, I think in places like Tennessee, Arizona, and Florida, they are now banning geoengineering. I'd just love to hear your thoughts about it.
I guess the only thing for me really to say is that just shows a distinct lack of understanding of natural systems. And again, going back to what I was saying, we are part of nature. We're humans, we're part of nature. We can't start messing around with natural systems, because once you start messing around with natural systems, we are pretty much.
I think it's a really difficult one, and knowing the degree to which these things is actually happening is always a challenge as well. I think it comes back to technology and people's attitude to technology. So what Tim said there about understanding systems, understanding connectivity of these various different things, and utilising the nature's technology really. Instead of looking for quick fixes, there is money to be made in technology, which is why the government is investing in technology around agriculture and technology and science, because they think if they can find a solution, then it will scale and make money that goes into the economy. And if you open any farming magazine, you'll see, even if they've got a big spread on regenerative agriculture, there'll then be a great big advert for nitrogen or the next biggest tractor or something like that. Because those are the things that people invest in, things that people invent that make money that go into the economy. Regenerative agriculture, agroecology, it's about information sharing. We have more or less what we need. There is a cost of transition, but it's not necessarily a cost of lots of extra new equipment. And it's about enabling that. And knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing is super important. And actually, when I talk about regenerative agriculture, this is something, I always think of it as a white, English-speaking person's way of interpreting indigenous agriculture. And this way of farming sort of grew up in the US, it went to Australasia, and it came to the UK within the last 5 or 10 years in terms of this idea of regenerative agriculture, and the way that we've interpreted it is slightly different to these other parts of the world, and society is part of that. How do you regenerate society and community and your health at the same time as biodiversity and soil health as well? So it's sort of thinking about all of these different things. Technology, I don't want to sound like I'm completely anti-technology. Technology can be really useful. Tim talked about bricks. Bricks monitors are really useful to be able to sort of identify the amount of nutrition in a particular thing, in being able to understand how soil is functioning, how water is filtering, how much carbon's in that soil, measuring the soil organic matter. In precision agriculture, where you might have robots that are helping you to reduce the nitrogen, so that you've simply got it spotting onto the places that need it, rather than just a sort of a general crop flow. So technology can be important, but it's understanding that it should be working with us and for us to restore natural systems, rather than being expected to work as this massive bandage and sticking plaster that's going to save us. That was a long answer. I hope that helps. Any more questions? One more question. Should we do 2 more questions? We're going slightly over. We'll do 2 more questions, and then that's it. And it's just, of course, all this stuff that we're talking about now, we're going to continue talking about in terms of the body and food and nutrition in the next session in 25 minutes.
Thank you very much, Lindsay, and the whole panel, given we're at the end. I've got 2 quick plugs. One is that between the talks we've got 30 minutes of short films related to soil and ultra-processed food, agroecological farming in there, so hop in there straight after while you wait for the next talk. Another is that, of course, you've mentioned that one of the ways we can support healthier soils and healthier people is to buy organic food, basically, and local food and stuff. One of the things I organise on the auspices of West Dorset Commons is the Bridport Food Co-op, which is basically a SUMA order once a month or so. So, you know, organic food is often more expensive, but a cheaper way to access it is to club together with others and buy it in bulk. Yeah, I'm talking about all the dry goods, the pulses and things you mentioned. But yeah, basically everything apart from the fresh stuff you can get cheaper by cutting out the middleman and just getting it direct from the cooperative wholesalers. And then third thing, the actual sort of question stroke point, is you mentioned that we need cows. Yeah, I'm a lifelong veggie, and I grew up thinking that you don't need, you know, everyone should be more veggie, and you know, I used to think that deer and squirrels were just cute things, whereas when I studied sustainable agriculture, I learned that they're pests really, and you can't get any trees unless you control them. We need trees. And you know, if you're depressed about things, I very highly recommend watching Wilding, the film about nets and rewilding, the amazing, incredible bounce back of nature that they've witnessed there. And there's also another brilliant film called Why Not Scotland, which looks at loads of rewilding projects across Europe. They're really amazing, and livestock is a key part of that. But at the same time, there's very, very strong scientific evidence here. There was, I think it was a 2018 report that looked at 38,000 different farms, that even the very best, lowest impact life cycle analysis of cattle farming is like 2 orders of magnitude at least more climate change emissions per gram of protein than plant-based protein. So, you know, all systems are more resilient when they've got more diversity, and having livestock helps recycle the nutrients and everything. Given you started with, you know, we need cows, I think it's also obvious we, on average, we eat less meat, but much better and much more regenerative. And it's possibly summed up best by, there's a great article in Project Drawdown, which is, the title is Regenerative Grazing is Overhyped as a Climate Solution. We should do it anyway, for all of the other things to do with biodiversity and soil health and everything like that. So yeah, I wanted to just hear from you, Finley, about that balance of, you probably should eat less meat, almost certainly on average, but even the best farm, lowest emission meat is still a lot more grandpa carbon emissions than plant-based proteins.
I want more. I want to eat more really good quality meat. I want to eat more really good quality dairy. I want to eat more pulses, more healthy food. I don't want to eat less of anything. I want more of these really good things. And if we are, just to take issue, slightly with what you said there, if we are only interested in emissions, we're not going to solve the ecological crisis. Emissions are only part of it. If you have a herd of 100 cows or a herd of 1 million cows, once they've been there for 20 years, although the emissions continue, there's no new warming from that herd, and it's really important to be aware of that. Now, the UK is, it has an awful lot of grazing land, an awful lot of grass. It may actually be, in terms of, continuing to trade, continuing to feed, that we need more ruminant livestock in the UK rather than less. We certainly need to move more of the ruminant livestock that we have in the West to the east, where we're trying to produce cereals and vegetables currently without really utilising the nutrients of those livestock. So we need a redistribution, and whether it goes up or down a bit, I'm less concerned about. If you are measuring the impact of ruminants in terms of not just emissions but carbon drawdown, and Project Drawdown I think is quite inaccurate at times, I have to say, in terms of that drawdown capacity. It doesn't measure, and it hasn't really understood regen quite in the way that some of the other stuff has. If you go to, let me plug a documentary, Roots So Deep, okay, by Peter Bick. My most recent podcast that came out this week was an interview with Peter. He is a Hollywood filmmaker, so he's a guy who makes the films about the making of the films. So he's made a film about the making of The Matrix, the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and all this sort of stuff. But now he's a professor of practice at Arizona State University. He spent 10 years doing the biggest project into adaptive multi-paddock grazing that there's ever been in the world, with 2 farm pairs. On one side of the fence, literally, you've got a regenerative farm doing adaptive multi-paddock grazing. On the other side of the fence, you've got somebody doing conventional grazing. And the results, the outcomes in terms of farmland birds, in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of nitrogen holding, water holding, they're just phenomenal. I think you've got to pay $15 to watch it at the moment, something like that. But it's Roots So Deep, and it's brilliant, and I really highly recommend it in terms of actual science, actual studies. But we need to get away from thinking about ruminants in terms of just emissions. It's emissions and cycling, and how in the right systems, and there are lots of the wrong systems, but how in the right systems those ruminants can help with water flow, with airflow, with biodiversity rebuilding, with adaptation, and all those other things as well. And if we simply look at emissions, we're not doing the job properly, I think. So that's the way I sort of respond to that. It's looking at ecology in the round. And we're going to have one more question. Tim, you just have a quick one.
Could you give us the name again of the man you just referred to?
Peter Bick.
Peter Bick.
Bick.
B-Y-C-K. Yeah, I'll just say, I took on a farm about 5 or 6 years ago down in Cornwall, and previous to me, you could consider it a vegan farm, I guess. It didn't have any livestock on it at all. There was about 300 acres of arable land, and half of that farm was moving into the estuary. The place, it was a monoculture of potatoes and grains and daffodils. And I came in, the first thing that I chose to do to convert that farm back into a regenerative organic system was to bring livestock back into that system. So I grew a really diverse cover crop that was grazable with livestock, and then I mob grazed those animals very deliberately across the landscape. And within 3 years, that soil system had completely changed from a chemistry-heavy, degraded system to an actual living, alive, ecologically sound system. And I think, again, it's about this understanding of where ruminants fit in a system. And yes, feedlots, having animals in barns and feeding them grains is really not a great system. But there is a movement here in the UK called the Pasture Food Matters. They keep changing it. PFL, Pasture for Life Association. And so they certify farmers for, these guys are certified. I do a lot of work with them mentoring farmers around grassland management. And they certify farmers who are 100% pasture based. And a lot of those are bringing livestock or have livestock in the system for that ecological value. So it's about moving livestock out of barns, stop feeding them grains because they shouldn't be fed grains, we should be eating the grains, and move to pasture-based systems. And if we did that, then that's when you get going.
Maybe someone should speak to all of us about this.
And just to finish on that, Arla have done an awful lot of research into regenerative, but they see it really as their way of sort of adapting their organic brands. They still have their mainstream, which is a bit of an unknown. Absolutely. And the other thing I would say, it's difficult to sort of point to any specific science, but there is more and more science, because science takes a generation to kind of have the idea, understand what it is that you want to research, then have the idea, then ask the question, then get the funding for it, then deliver the research. And because regen is quite new, this science is emerging, but there are quite a lot of farms that are now able to demonstrate that they're delivering better than net zero just in terms of emissions with livestock. And FAI Farms in Oxfordshire is one of those. Again, if you look up FAI Farms, they have a report on grazing livestock that George Monbiot recently rubbished in his column, but he was failing to understand what that research was about, which is why he did that. So net zero is entirely possible on livestock farms. It's about how they're farmed and then what else they're delivering as well. Final question.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Well, first of all, thank you. That was an amazing discussion. It's brilliant to have heard your views. I work for the Bridport project, which is a government landscape recovery project. And I just wanted to say a word about connectivity, because all of you are doing the most amazing things, and it feels to me like the landscape recovery initiative, which came from the previous government, which really came from the food farming commission, is just a really good way of going forward. And just so everybody knows, we've got 57 farmers in this catchment, in Brit catchment, expressing a really strong interest in being a part of this project. We're halfway through the development phase, and what we're hoping is that we've got, when we come to sign an agreement with DEFRA, we'll have half of the rural catchment under recovery for nature, for food, for people, and for the local economy. So talking about systems thinking, in some ways landscape recovery does begin to address that. And I think it's a really exciting development, one that we really don't seem, after the spending review, like we will get funded for it, because we will tend to books about it. But yeah, I think the farmers who have entered into this really deserve our respect, because a lot of them are conventional farmers who farm the way they've been told to farm for many, many years. And it also rewards people who have farmed and looked after the land for generations. So in that respect, it's brilliant. It acknowledges the people who've been doing it right all along, and it acknowledges the fact that people are willing to change. And so I just wanted to end on a bit of an update.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the fact that you did say that, because it is easy just to knock the government, and there is so much more the government needs to do, but there are things that are going on, and as you say, landscape recovery projects are phenomenally important in terms of mobilising not only government money and public money, but also private funding coming in there, working with water companies, and corporates to sort of try and get those things. There are loads of really exciting, really interesting things going on in the country. It's difficult to encapsulate them all because often they're quite local and they're quite sort of site specific. We try and cover as many of them as we can on the Farmgate podcast, so just to plug that one more time. But yeah, absolutely, and I want to just sort of say, if you want to find out more about the Brit project, it's britvalley.org, so that's 57 farmers that are part of that, and also there's the Farming in Protected Landscape scheme, which is currently continuing, where farmers, particularly in Dorset's been really good at giving small grants to regenerative type farmers to make a big difference in terms of climate and nature and society on their farms, and Tom Monroe there at Dorset National Landscape has been fantastic on that. We have just one quick point.
Yeah, no, so I'm also here with the Brit Valley Project, and we've got a little stand up there, so I'm walking around. If you have any questions, just ask me.
I'm being told I have to wind up because we're almost on to the next thing. Thank you. You've been an amazing audience, and you've asked so many lovely questions, and thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank the panel, Leila Scriven from Tamarisk Farm, Alex Montgomery from Generation Store UK, and Tim Williams from Bridport Farmers. Thank you very much. In 10 minutes' time, we will be talking about what is the hidden cost of ultra-processed food. So please go away, grab a coffee, come back again. Thank you.
Come and watch about soil quickly.
And then
there.
Phil.
Yeah, sorry, I had to mention, in the cinema, if you get a chance, not just now, but after the next talk, lots and lots of films being shown, little short films that'll thrill you and excite you.